Guys, welcome back to the show where we talk about all things sales and fitness. Today it is just going to be me, and I'm going to be talking about the gap and the gain. And I have a couple stories that I'm going to share about it. But what is the gap and the gain? Now, this was a concept that I first heard from a book, which was titled 10x is easier than 2x. If you haven't checked that book out, definitely recommend it. It was a solid book and had me really thinking about my life in different ways. But I want you guys to think about this. Now, I have some notes on my phone that I'll be looking at. But most ambitious people feel like they are behind, even when they are making progress, even when they are winning. You can be making more money than ever. You can be in better shape than you ever have been. You can be improving your life, and you still feel like you're losing. Why? Because most people live in something called the gap. If you don't understand this concept, you can build an incredible life and still feel miserable. Now, the gap is where you measure yourself against the ideal. Essentially, you're measuring yourself against this perfect reality where you think you should be, not against where you started. So, not the progress you've made, you're always looking at the gap, just the distance between where you are and essentially perfection, which none of us can ever attain. So, the problem is that this line continues to move throughout your life and it continues, even if you're succeeding, even if you're doing better, even if you're improving, right? So, immediately your brain says this isn't enough. Now, I want to talk about this gap because if you're listening to this podcast, you are a high achiever. You probably deal with being in the gap more often than being in the gain. And I'll explain what the gain is in a second. But ambitious people, they are just wired to think that they can improve, to think that they can get better. And I don't think that is a bad thing at all, but I do think it can get out of control. And I'm going to share some stories about where I think I truly let this happen to myself, and it was hard to enjoy. It was hard to enjoy life. It was hard to enjoy anything because I was constantly in this gap in my fitness, in this gap in my sales. And the first story I want to share is my sales journey, right? Been in sales for, my gosh, over 7, 8 years now, right? In different, different things. I've sold different things along the years, but it's crazy how you could close deals. You could have these improving calls. You could be doing so much better. But what did I always remember? I'd always remember the call that I didn't get. I'd always remember the sell that fell through the cracks or the one that was super close to closing, but I didn't end up closing it. And your brain ignores the wins because you're so focused on this gap of, this where you want to improve, and you simply just replay the losses over and over, and it really does get in your head thinking that you're always losing. And so that's what I wanted to talk about with sales is, yes, you want to find the improvements after your calls. Yes, you want to get better. Yes, you want to continually look for ways to improve. On the flip side though, I found like there was a point in my sales career where I was so fanatical about the ones that I didn't close that I felt like I went down this spiral of I would close less and less and less because I was looking for that. I was wondering why. I was wondering why. And your brain almost like assumes that you're not going to get the sell every time. And you start to like go down this path of not believing in yourself, not believing in yourself. And so I feel like this prospect is really interesting because on one hand, if you're the person that always thinks everything is good and there's nothing to improve, obviously that's an issue. That's a big issue as well, right? But then on the other side, if you're ambitious and if you're listening to this call, you probably tend to lean a little bit more to being in the gap and what you've missed. You got to remember the progress. You got to remember that you're getting better. You got to remember the calls you did win, the calls you did succeed on. I would say more often. Yes, you got to look at the calls you didn't close, but you got to be more often focused on the winning, focused on the things that did go well, focus on, wow, like I did good at this. Now I can't improve this, but I did so good at this. And your brain starts saying, yeah, we want more of that. And it really comes down to your focus, right? When your focus is always on the negative, you'll see more of the negative. When you move your mind to a little bit more of the positive, you will see the positive. That was my learning that I had to have in sales. I got to a place where all I could think about was how I wasn't as good as I needed to be, and all the things I was doing wrong, and it was debilitating. Like, I literally couldn't even get on a sales call because I was overthinking so much that it was crippling, man. You do not wanna go down that place where it's all about the gap. It's not a fun place to be. It's not where you want to live. And it's the same thing in your fitness. So, transitioning from sales to fitness, you can lose weight, you can get stronger, you can build muscle, you can become the best version of yourself. And when you look up in the mirror, do you focus on the gap? And it's funny, if you do the same thing in sales, you'll probably do the same thing with your fitness. You'll look at all of the things you don't like about your body. No matter if you lost 50 pounds, 100 pounds, you're six pack shredded, no matter, what, you'll be like, I need to gain 5 pounds. I need to, I have wrinkles. I need to do Botox. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need, this is off. This is wrong with me. And again, if you're focusing on that, when you look in the mirror every time, you ignore the process, and you also ignore the things that did go well, the improvements, which we would call the gain. In the book, he talks about how that's the gain, right? And I did go through this with my fitness as well. I remember at one point I was in the best shape of my life that I had been in at that point. I had lost a lot of weight. I was strong. I was feeling good. I was proud of myself, but this gap of, well, I'm not here. Well, I'm not what this person is. And then you start going into comparison. And again, I think it's the same principle. You don't want to lean too far in the other way where it's just all about the progress, because progress is what creates happiness. And so in reality, you do want to have a couple things you're striving for. You do want to have a couple things you're excited about, but it doesn't overconsume you. You're not freaking out about it. You're excited to just progress, and you're grateful for where you're at. You're grateful for the progress you do make. You're grateful for the ability that your body got you to this place that you're in right now. So if I were to give you a definition of the gain is measuring backwards. The gain is looking at how far you've come, not looking at perfection, where you were at a year ago, 5 years ago. When you really look back, your health, your fitness, all these things, and you start to realize, wow, I've come such a far way. You start to really see the progress. You start to get excited. You see proof that what you're doing is actually working. And I believe that that really builds the confidence in yourself to keep doing the things. If you're always looking at the negative, it's not exciting enough to keep doing the things because you don't think it's working. You don't feel like it's working. And that's a terrible way to do it. My final thoughts on this is there is a balance. You need both. Now, the gap, again, where you want to go, it fuels your ambition. It gets you excited, right? Because you want this next version of yourself. And you need that gap. You always do. It doesn't matter if you have $100 million in your bank account. It doesn't matter if you have $1 in your bank account. It doesn't matter if you are six pack shredded or if you need to lose 10 pounds or 1 pound. You have to have ambition of where you want to go. None of us are perfect in any area of our life. None of us. That is the cool thing. None of us are, and so there's always something to find in the gap. That will fuel your ambition. The gain, all of the things you've gained up to this point in your life, that comes from gratitude. That comes from confidence. That makes you excited that you've actually made progress and that what you're doing is working, and it gives you sense of fulfillment. I really believe that gratitude brings that fulfillment inside of you, and the most fulfilled people have a lot of gratitude. So you can't live in either one or you'll feel miserable. You can't just live in the gap, and you can't just live in the gain either. I think a lot of people think, well, I'll just live in the gain of gratitude. You got to have ambition. If you're not progressing, you will be miserable as well. So you got to use both, and you got to pull on both. That's really, that's the show for today. That was really what I wanted to talk about. There was a concept that I've been struggling with. There's been times when I really, really get stuck in the gap. man, I get stuck there and it feels like nothing I'm doing is working. It feels like there's no progress made. And I feel like a lot of driven people deal with that as well. And so hopefully this podcast helped you kind of bring these thoughts out and remember like to stop and look back and to be proud of yourself and grateful for the progress you have made. Because if you don't do that, you'll never feel successful ever, no matter where you go, no matter what happens. Ambition lives in the gap. I'll leave you with this quote: ambition lives in the gap, gratitude lives in the gain. When you measure against perfection, you always lose. Happiness comes from measuring backwards. Do both. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Until next time.